Hello and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the nation's oldest public affairs discussion forum. I am Deborah Reebok of Deborah Reebok Photography, a member of the club's art forum and your program host for today. So we already figured out who's here for the first time. Welcome again. And we are pleased to welcome the new club members who are tuned in today also virtually. I'm extremely pleased and honored to be your host at today's meeting, to welcome you to a collaborative event with the California Academy of Sciences about the power of images to change how we see the world. As most of you know, the Academy is a scientific and educational institution located in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, and if you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. It includes an aquarium, planetarium, rainforest, and natural history museum all under one living roof. It's pretty phenomenal. I don't think there's another organization like that that has all of those elements in it, except we have it here. Today's Commonwealth Club meeting highlights Seeing It All. Women photographers expose our planet. The latest publication from Big Picture, a natural world photography competition and exhibit created by Cal Academy. And personally, as a photographer, I love the images. They're just spectacular. I'm turning the program over now to neuroscientist, writer, and stage director in her spare time, Indra Viskontas. Indra will introduce our panel and moderate today's discussion. Indra?
Thank you very much. Thank you. So it's my great pleasure today to introduce Joanne MacArthur, who's an award-winning photojournalist and the founder of We Animals Media. She's also the grand prize winner of Big Picture in 2022 and one of this year's competition judges. So please join me in welcoming Joanne MacArthur.
Thank you.
And also joining us tonight is Rhonda Rubenstein. She's the creative director of the Cal Academy of Sciences and the co-founder of the Big Picture Natural World Photography Competition and Initiative. Rhonda. Oh, thank you. So I'm going to kick it off by talking a little bit about perhaps, hopefully, some counterintuitive elements of how we see. You might wonder, what is a neuroscientist doing up here? Well, Rhonda and I have actually been working together for almost probably 2 years now, maybe something like that. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about as a neuroscientist who also has the soul of an artist is understanding what the arts and the sciences that are artistic in their way can tell us about what it means to be human. And one of the things that I love to do is to take some kind of artistic product and examine what it tells us about our own experiences and what it essentially can tell us about the brain. Most of us have this illusion that what we see is just a veridical representation of the physical world. For example, we think that everything in our sight line is actually seen with pretty good vision, with pretty good acuity. But it turns out that we are legally blind everywhere except what is the center of our vision, which is about the size of a thumbnail at arm's length. Everywhere else, you're legally blind. And yet we don't have that illusion, or we don't experience that as we go out into the world. So what has to happen is that your brain, which has this really impoverished signal of light coming from the outside world, has to recreate this inner subjective experience of what is out there. And to me, looking at how we curate images, how we find meaning in images is one great way to understand this additional process that happens in our brain that's outside of our retina, outside of our eyes. So here is an image. If I talked about the Easter Bunny, you might see a rabbit. If I talked about a pond, you might see a duck. But what's interesting is that in general, you don't see a duck and a rabbit at the same time. Your brain switches from one to the other, which if your brain was just representing the world as it was, doesn't really make sense. But if you think about the fact that your brain actually gets very little information from the outside world and instead has to pick and choose what's meaningful and give you that subjective experience, it absolutely makes sense, because this image is either a duck or a rabbit. We don't generally pay attention to the other features of the image. Although if you have certain neurodegenerative conditions, for example, like Alzheimer's disease or semantic dementia, you might actually see very different elements of this picture. And now we're actually learning that by understanding where people are looking in an image and what they see can actually be diagnostic of even things like neurodegenerative diseases. So one example, when you go to the neurologist to get your mind tested, essentially, they might give you something called the Ray Osterith figure. And this figure is something that they'll ask you first to copy. And so if you're able to copy it, that tells the neurologist that you can see it as the rest of us see it. And then they're going to take it away and they're going to do a bunch of other tests for a while, and they're going to ask you to draw it from memory. Very hard, right? And most people, if they don't have any kind of issues, will put some kind of semblance of a bunch of shapes together and some crosses and maybe the circle, and they'll remember certain elements of it. But if you're having trouble with your memory, and if you're maybe in the early stages of mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease, you don't just put down a bunch of squiggles. You put down something that is meaningful. So interestingly, often patients will draw faces or houses. Mm-hmm. So this shows us that even the memory of that visual image has a meaning assigned to it, has been categorized as something that is important to us, faces or houses. So as we think about how photographers curate this visual world, I think this really starts to help us understand our own experiences and what we can learn about ourselves by what draws us into an image. So that gets me to conservation photography, which is different from wildlife and nature photography. It has a mission to incite you to preserve and protect the environment and those of us and other species that inhabit it. And oftentimes, in order to do that, the photographer tells the story behind the image, and that helps us extract more meaning from the image that goes beyond just the sort of beauty of the image itself. So last year, I had the great honor of being the Osher Fellow at the Cal Academy of Sciences. So I got to hang out with Rhonda a lot, and we got to talk about what can science tell us about how we experience these images, what makes a winning image, et cetera. And at the end of a year, I think we can still rightly say that the conclusion is, well, there's a lot more to learn, and we need to keep working next year. But we used a couple of, we used a few different tools to try to get at this question. And one was that we had a survey in the exhibit. So a few months of the year, when the competition winners have been announced, there is an exhibit at the Academy of Sciences in the piazza of the images and the stories behind them, et cetera. So we put a little QR code into this exhibit and asked people to, in a 2-minute survey, tell us how they feel when they look at these images. So I'm going to give you an example of some of the data. So this is some of the data from the survey. And so we had people look at this grid and essentially touch on their phone or touch screen how they felt, whether they had low energy or high energy, whether they had positive or negative feelings. And what's really interesting to me is that nobody in this exhibit was low energy and had negative feelings. But there were people spread out into the other quadrants. So some people found it calming or at least experienced low energy, but a positive feeling. Some people found it really exciting. In fact, a lot of the people that responded actually did seem to say, this is energizing. This is, making me, feel something and raising my energy levels. Which is great in terms of conservation photography because that suggests that it's being effective. It is inciting something, because the first step in inciting someone to do something is getting them to feel something about it and giving them the energy to then act. So this is an example of one of the winning images. So this is David Slater's Sea Lion Fall. And what you'll notice is that it's beautiful. It's got beautiful colors. But maybe it's a little sad when you think about what's happening here. It turns out that this is a sea lion corpse, and it's being consumed by these, I think they're called bat starfish or bat stars. And so once you start to understand what's happening here, that begins to make you feel a little bit more empathy, but then also think about the natural world and how essentially this sea lion is giving back its energy to the sea in which it swam. So that's an example of how the story behind the image enhances our sense of what's happening and our feelings towards it. But one of the things that Rhonda and I talked about a lot that is a bit baffling is that in the arts, sometimes things that make us feel bad are actually good for us. We watch horror films, or we go to the opera where often people die. Characters die in the opera all the time, and those operas are actually more popular than the comedies. So why is it that we go through these cathartic experiences, these emotional journeys, and that is something that we find pleasurable? Why does sad music feel so good? And so one of the things we wanted to see is whether or not we could get a sense of when people are distressed or upset, how that makes them feel in terms of their place in the world, their sense of belonging, their motivation. So we asked them a series of questions, whether they were interested, excited, inspired, connected, motivated, guilty, distressed, upset. So you've got the sort of more positive experiences on the left-hand side, the more negative experiences on the right-hand side, and then the connection and motivation to act in the middle. And what we, or what the big picture hopes to accomplish with these conservation photography images is a sense that we are connected in this natural world, and therefore we need to be motivated to act to protect it. So I'm going to give you data from two images. One is the grand prize winner, Karen Egner's Bee Balling, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this image in a second. But most people who look at this image have positive emotions. So we see that they don't feel guilty, distressed, or upset looking at this image. Instead, they're more likely to feel interested, excited, and inspired. Another image, Bense Mate's Sickening Delicacy, is a little bit disturbing. When you first look at it, it's very colorful and it's well composed, but then you realize these are frog parts. These are the remains of frogs. And all of a sudden, the name Sickening Delicacy of that image starts to make sense. So people who looked at this image did tend to feel guilty, distressed, and upset. But what's really interesting is that in both of these images, you saw an equal amount of feelings of connection and a motivation to act. So that's interesting when we think about this terrible beauty of some of these photos and what role that has in terms of conservation photography. So this is bee balling, and as I mentioned, one of the important features of conservation photography is the story behind the image. It turns out these are cactus bees in Texas, and they're generally solitary, but once a year or so, the very few females come out of the ground and get swarmed by males who want to mate. So this is a big orgy ball. So that's bee balling. I've already told you the story behind Sickening Delicacy. So I think in Romania, this was outside of a restaurant, and these were the parts of the frog that were being discarded. Then we have the art of nature category, and this is a photograph by J. Fritz Rumpf called Field of Dreams, and it's a little bit abstract, it's beautiful, and this is an opportunity for you to project your own sort of meaning into what is happening here, but this is in fact the underside of a mushroom. And the blue coloring might be linked to some psychedelic properties of this mushroom, and all of a sudden, Field of Dreams begins to make sense, and you start to connect more with this image. And the last image that I want to show is one of the Human Nature winner from this year's competition. It's by Douglas Gimshy, and it's called Nose to Nose. So it's very cute. It's a cute little baby wombat, and you can see the connection with the human being. Wait till I tell you the story. So this baby wombat was found in the pouch of its mother that was killed by a car. And if people hadn't bothered to look into the pouch, they never would have found this baby, and it would have died a gruesome, horrible death. Instead, this baby was found and was bottle fed by the people that found it, and that's what this image is about. So that's enough from me.
It's never enough from you.
I'm going to ask Rhonda a few questions first, and I'm going to start with asking, how did the big picture competition start, and what were you hoping to achieve?
Thanks. So I'm happy to be here. I have to just say that I'm happy to talk about all this. I'm a writer, and so being a writer, I have notes, and being me, I'm going to refer to them. So sorry, but you will thank me later, I promise. Okay, big picture. Yes. So my previous life, as some of you know, was a magazine art director in New York City. And there, sort of realizing how much images really shape public perception and influence behavior. So that was my background. And then 10 years ago at the Academy, we were just beginning to talk about people's disconnection from nature. Conservation photography was just starting to emerge as a new genre of photography. And there was no major wildlife competition west of the Mississippi. So in 2014, we took the plunge and launched an annual photo competition, now known as Big Picture. So we divided up the natural world, into 6 unnatural categories, and then recruited top photographers as judges. And that was all thanks to Susie Esterhaus, our jury chair. So we cobbled together an in-house website and put out a call for entries. But then, since 10 years ago, we've looked at probably 85,000 images submitted by photographers from 70 countries, at least. And we've also awarded $120,000 of prizes to help photographers. So, and we are very happy to support great photographers, and you'll hear from Joanne in a little bit. But I guess the second question is, what were we hoping to achieve? And I think we wanted to create a modern conservation photography photo competition. So, and since then, I think Big Picture has become one of the most prestigious competitions in its field. And then the resulting exhibition that is at the Academy of Sciences, which gets about 1 million visitors a year, is seen by many of those. But I think the other sort of really important thing that's not so obvious is that we've been able to provide more exposure for the photographers who are working on these really important issues. And so this is kind of how it works, coming from the other side of publishing. So winning competition images are great stories. They're ready to go, ready for publication, and the media loves these packages. So we get great exposure around the world, including photographers' hometowns. And then also we're able to syndicate the photographs through the Academy's storytelling site, Biographic. And then those stories get amplified in international publications like the BBC and The Guardian, and they take on a life of their own from there. So that's what we have achieved.
And this year comes the publication of Seeing It All, the book. So why this book now, and why did you choose to feature images that were exclusively taken by women?
So why now? I mean, I think everyone in this room can agree that the clock is ticking. I think the alarm went off a while ago, and we've just been pressing snooze for as long as we can. But it's a unique moment in time, and I think I'll paraphrase Sylvia Earle, who said this much more brilliantly in her foreword. But basically, she was saying, like, this moment is unique because never before have we really known what's at stake and know what to do about it. So, this is the time. But, why this book now? I mean, I think of it as kind of a manifesto. So not an angry, burn it down manifesto, but a manifesto of enticement. So each chapter, as you've seen here, sort of announces a photographer's stance about what's needed to restore our planet and the role that photography plays in it. So I think, we need to see what's going on in the world and then just understand it in a different way, as you've alluded to. And it is the wonder and the woe. Some of the photos show nature's beauty, and the others show the human impact on it. But I think together, they, as we say, expose our planet in unexpected ways. And combined as a book, I think this collection of images really becomes a very powerful argument.
So what was something that surprised you as the book came together?
I realized, because I have notes, that I did not answer the question about why focus on women.
Oh, well,
and that's why I have notes.
Okay, we'll pause. We'll pause on the surprising part and go back to the women photographers.
Yes, women. Why not focus on women? Oh my God. Most of the photography books are heavily weighted towards men, and even in the industry, women are underrepresented. I think we looked at a recent survey that most publications and media have a 5-to-1 ratio of male photographers to women. And even in our own big picture competition, sadly, it's only a small percentage of photographers who are women who've entered. I think it's like 20 to 30%. So the issue with that is that the winners overall will be there'll be less women winners overall. So we're really trying to change that. We're working to raise awareness, encourage more women to submit to the competition, offering a discount for women in case there's any photographers in the audience. There's still time to submit. But we still wanted to get, to do something more and make a more visible difference. And that's why we wanted to do this book and showcase the work of the women photographers. Because over the years, we've awarded many outstanding women photographers. And no one had published a book of women wildlife photographers. So, and all the photographers in the book are either judges from Big Picture or past winners.
So let's get to the surprising question. What surprised you as the book came together?
Right, next page. Many things surprised me. That everyone agreed to do it was a great surprise. That we got the book done was another surprise. And also that it really is resonating with people was also a really wonderful surprise. And there might be some other interesting ideas coming out of it. But so for the book itself, I think one thing, sort of looking back, that was kind of surprising is that there were 3 common themes that emerged from it, from photographers with very, very different backgrounds and expertise. So the 3 were compassion, connection, and conscience. And I will tell you about these. So the first one is compassion, and that's for other living beings. And when we see news photos of people sheltering, from the war, we pretty easily feel their suffering. But the photographs in this book extend that compassion to our more distant relatives, other animals, plants, the living planet. And Morgan Heim, who you see here or there, is sort of a great example of it. So this series, it's a series of roadkill where she has arranged them with lush flowers around them. And so she calls these memorials apologies. Apologies to, the raccoons and the snakes and the other kind of nuisance animals. So in these tributes, you actually feel for the unsuspecting creature who literally never knew what hit him. And since the publication, people have actually reached out to Morgan and shared their guilt over just leaving an animal sort of dying on the side of the road. So it's, it's a sort of beautiful, tragic, shot, and really extends the compassion. The second one is the connection, and that sort of connection of everything. I think, we all know intellectually that our lives depend on nature's interconnected systems, the food we eat, the water we drink, But Camille Seaman sort of emotionally connects us to the world around us. And she recalls visits to her grandfather on the Shinnecock Reservation in New York when he introduced her to the trees, saying, "This is a birch tree. It is your relative in the same way I am your relative."
You have to remind me which
Yeah.
is it back?
Yeah, go back just right there.
There,
That's
sorry.
perfect. So she sees like the plants and animals and insects and all else as our literal relations, not resources. And so these magnificent icebergs, through her lens, become these portraits of ancient creatures. And so that's why, sort of in the book, as you can see, one of the spreads, we paired the icebergs with some indigenous portraits, and these portraits were done when she went back and photographed people. She said, however you want to be portrayed, if you want to be portrayed in whatever kind of dress and activity. And so this is what she did. And then the third thing is conscience. And Britta Jasinski, yes, she has a great quote, which I will also read. Photography, filmmaking, and journalism are among the most important professions on the planet. Without these, the world's conscience would wither. And so she photographed in a facility in Denver that houses over 1.4 million wildlife products that were seized by federal authorities. So just like unbelievable amount of like rhinoceros horns, monkey skulls, stuffed tiger fetuses. And she said the stench of death was just unbearable. So, it's not easy to gain access to these facilities, and the areas that she could photograph are pretty limited. So the impact of the illegal wildlife trade is not that apparent. So that's why we need this kind of evidence. And so she's turned these like really just heartbreaking images into, beautifully haunting photographs and providing the photographic evidence. And so, stopping illegal wildlife trade is now up to us. And then there's, maybe later I can talk about how this image actually did help do that.
Sure. So we're going to move to Joanne, and I'm just going to forward the slideshow to where your images begin, which I believe is here. So I'm going to hand the clicker to you so you can have control over what people see. So let's first talk about the role that journalism plays in your work. How do you get the full story from a series of photos, and how does that relate to kind of your work as a professional photographer?
Well, I might have to contest the word full. Just as it's impossible to fully know another human being, it's something to strive towards, is to get, if not a full story, then a fuller story than what a flat image can provide to us. And for me, that's the heart of photography, getting beyond what we can see. If you look at Ron, who's the chimpanzee on the left, well, it's a nice picture, and it needs to be a nice looking picture, a beautiful picture in order to engage you. But it should invoke questions from you as well. And we should be able to provide the answers. And that's where the journalism side of it comes in, which is really exciting. Photographers are naturally curious people. We want to know the who's, what, why's, when's, and so on. And that's why I'm so invested in photojournalism and animal photojournalism. And so Ron here, you don't really know what's happening, but in fact, he's been rescued. He spent a life in research. He was used in invasive studies for about 25 years before he ended up here at Save the Chimps. And I was able to do some research and look into his files and find out all the things that happened to him in his journey in those 25 years. And I also found out that we were the same age. There's 2 months between us. He was born in September and I was born in December. And so I started thinking about the chronology of our lives and what I was doing at 8 years old. I was climbing trees, but, he should have been climbing trees, but there he was. He'd already gone through perhaps even hundreds of surgeries and so on. But he was rescued at the age of 25. And though he had a sanctuary space to spend time in, he always wanted to stay indoors in this nest that he would make himself. Mm-hmm. That's where he felt safe. And that's why the research and the journalism side of it really brings images to life. Once you know those details about Ron, and there are plenty more, I think that the image can incite caring, compassion, and change. That's the big one for me. I think that's the big one for a lot of us in photography, is we want to create something that engages you and then inspires you. And I'll keep the story about Jean and Opie short. So Jean is on the left and Opie is on the right. And Opie had been left for dead at a farm, and Jean was investigating farms. And he found this young calf and picked him up and put him in his car and brought him to his sanctuary, which is called Farm Sanctuary. And Jean and his staff spent months nursing Opie back to health, making sure he had all the food and nutrients and care and compassion and safety that he needed to thrive. And Opie lived, I think, 14 years, maybe 16 years. And Jean and Opie always remained good friends. So,
given that context,
Yeah.
what do you hope your photography accomplishes?
Well, it must accomplish. It must accomplish my goals of getting people to look and to not turn away. And that's hard when you're photographing this kind of content. And this is actually my specialty. It's to go to photograph the animals where we don't see them. Factory farms, research labs, fur farms, and so on. So it can be really tricky. It's easier with images that are beautiful of animals and wild animals. And that's one way of grabbing people's attention and getting them to care. Much harder when you're going to fur farms. And but what do I want to accomplish? I don't want people to turn away from these animals. I don't want people to turn away from the animals that we use in our lives. And that's working. I've been photographing these animals for about 20 years now, and we have about 212,000 followers across our platforms. When I say we, it's my agency, We Animals Media. And we just want to inspire people. We also want to shock people into seeing the reality of how we treat animals and our relationship with animals. We want people to see the connectedness between us and them, we other animals. And I want to dissolve that wall that we have between them. It's not that mink are farmed, it's that we wear fur, and it's connected. It's not something that's at a distance. And with this image in particular, there are other layers to this. Mink carry zoonotic diseases, and so Denmark, for example, they had an estimated 17 million mink on their farms, and then when COVID hit, they euthanized all of those animals. And it's 15 million or 17 million. It's a colossal number. So there's all sorts of things that happen when we have these types of relationships with animals. And so to your question, what do I hope to attain and change? Well, these images, all of the images that we have in this book and that we take are meant to support people who are campaigning. They're meant to support academics. They're meant to support science. They're meant to support legal action as well. Like, there's so much that we can do with photography, which is why I love it so much. It's hard work, and all of us in this book literally go to the ends of the earth to document animals and ecosystems in the natural world so that other people can care. And it's working.
Yeah, tell us more about We Animals Media.
Okay. We Animals was my solo project for about 15 years. And I found that I was traveling 6 to 8 months a year, but all of that work was just ending up on a hard drive. And that's no good, because the point of the work is to influence and have it out there in the world. And so I decided that I would create something bigger from this project. And I started fundraising, and we had staff, and we call it We Animals Media. And so now the project has become a photo agency. We have 13 staff and 110 photographers. And and what we do is animal photojournalism, which is like conservation photography, but it's another step. Photography is always evolving. And with animal photojournalism, what we say is that photojournalism is about the human condition almost exclusively. And conservation photography still excludes some animals. So we wanted animal photojournalism to include everybody, every kind of animal that we use. And so that's what we're doing. And we have 25,000 images and videos that are available to anyone helping animals, lawyers, academics, advocates, and so on. And those are available for free. And so we put images out into the world. We're able to do all this for free because we have funds coming in to the organization. And we're growing. We just see that there's a demand for the work that we're doing. And it spreads by word of mouth, and it spreads through the media and through amazing competitions, which are so supportive of the work that we do. So we're off to the races. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the competition. You've been a winner and a judge. Mm-hmm. So what for you makes an effective image?
Well, it's getting harder and harder, isn't it? I think it is, because the quality of work and the technologies that we have are really advanced now. And so it is getting harder, but you still have to capture a unique moment. I think it's what makes a really good image is when we see an interaction between individuals, an individual and their environment. I think when I'm jurying, I'm looking for something unique. I'm looking for connections, and also really strong captions, which comes back to the journalism side of it. We will understand what you're saying through the picture a lot more if you give us a nice solid paragraph about what's going on and why it's important.
Okay. I'm going to ask for my clicker back.
She's taking control.
And so, Rhonda, can you tell us about some of the other photographers in the book?
I am happy to do that because they are all amazing, brave, brilliant, and badass, really. But seriously, so the book starts off with the work of Amy Vitale, because it's arranged alphabetically by first name, because that was good way to arrange it as anything. But and she was named one of the 50 badass women by InStyle magazine. So it was a series that celebrates women who show up, speak up, and get things done, which is definitely Amy. I mean, she's a ton of other accomplishments in the photography world, but her story is really interesting. She was a war photographer for many years, and then she had this light bulb moment, and she realized that the conflicts that she was covering as human conflict were actually the result of environmental breakdowns. So she shifted her focus to the humans who were working to save the places by saving the animals. And then she's been documenting the story of the northern rhinos. Not the winos, the rhinos. That's a whole different story for the last 13 years. So, but she's been documenting these rhinos, sort of understanding that this species that you see on screen was probably go extinct in her lifetime. So she followed the airlift of the last two females and male, who you see here, from a zoo in Czechoslovakia to their homeland in Kenya. And the idea was they would encourage these carefree nights of romance in the wild. But unfortunately, there was no baby bump. The females were not able to take a calf to birth. And so this photo here is the photo of Sudan, who is the last male of his species, sort of dying in the arms of his keeper. And that's Jojo on the left there. And she says she only took 2 photos that day. And one was on the cover of National Geographic and in our book and probably everywhere else. But, of this photo, Amy says, You probably can't read the caption, so I'll read it. This is the best and worst of humanity. Jojo, the keeper, represents our best, but Sudan's death represents the worst. The choice is in our hands. What we do next represents our future. So the story continues today. So there's an in vitro process using southern white rhinos, and Amy's there with her camera. And of course, we are much more invested in it, having seen Amy's incredible moving image, of that journey. So that's, one of the many great photographers. Another one that I have to talk about is Christina Mittermeier. She's like one of the world's most influential photographers. Her photographs of life in and around the ocean are just the most, I think some of the most spectacular in the world. But interestingly and importantly, she literally created what we call conservation photography. So Indri's talked a little bit about that, conservation photography. But the story of it is also kind of interesting because, it started at these wildlife photography conferences in the 90s, and she began sort of asking questions at the conferences. And so in the interview that's in the book, she recounts how she questioned whether photographers, she stood up and questioned whether photographers could use their cameras to protect the wild places and the creatures that they were photographing, and then use these photos as advocacy tools. And she says she was literally told to shut up and sit down by the predominantly male attendees. But there was a small group of people, of photographers, who were actually already taking their photos to governments and donors and policymakers to advocate for conservation. And so the International League of Conservation Photographers, ILCP, started in 2005 with Christina and a few other members. And so, more recently, she's co-founded Sea Legacy, which is a nonprofit organization, again, similar to yours, but a little different. But she's, providing visual content and conservation solutions, and they're really trying to support the protection and the rewilding of the oceans within our lifetimes. So that's kind of amazing. And then I have to talk about Susie because she is the co-founder of Big Picture and sort of the guiding light, and also just an award-winning photographer, best known for her photographs of documenting sort of cute baby animals and newborns. But part of the reason she does this is that she believes that kids' disconnection from nature is our greatest threat to wildlife. So she's been doing, sort of, I think, 25 kids' books, which Indri's kids love.
Yeah, my 5-year-old daughter, Susie, is her, heroine. She has all of her books, and she gifts her books to her friends for Christmas and birthdays. And she got to meet Susie once, and that was, the best day of her life.
So yeah, I think we have it here, but one of my favorites of her images is of a swimming pygmy three-toed sloth. So it's a great sort of above and below the water shot of apparently the most prolific swimmers of the pygmy family. So, but she said that swimming with the sloth was one of the highlights of her career.
Apparently, they're fast swimmers.
I was wondering how fast they got. I was really, I did not.
Yeah, they're slow at everything else, but put them in the water and they get grooving.
The secret to their success. But then, there's more to that. Susie is a trustee of the Sloth Conservation Fund. And so she's been working with Dr. Rebecca Cliff, who's the world's leading sloth expert, which would be a great job. And they've raised over $100,000 for sloth conservation. So again, sort of using images and advocacy, another sort of proof of the power of photography.
And before Rebecca and Susie's work came to light, sloths were just considered pests They were not considered worthy of kind of taken care of, and so that their work, both in the Dr. Cliff's kind of observational work and sort of sanctuary work, and then Susie's images, have completely changed the perception of sloths, even in where they are. So it's kind of amazing. Yeah. That was it, right? Yes, for that question. Okay. I realized that I jumped one of the questions earlier, Joanne, about your, as you look at these photos in the book, what jumps out at you in terms of either the work of a specific photographer or the overall gestalt of the book?
I do appreciate the focus on women in a male-dominated industry. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked as a photographer, "Oh, you must have an in, you must be so and so's niece or something. That's how you got this job, No, and of course we're just as capable, and we see this across a lot of careers, things that we are perceived to not be able to do or shouldn't do, and it's a male-dominated industry, so it's really important to showcase how we can do things. I noticed that Esther's work focuses on the women scientists in the Antarctic largely. That's fantastic. Science has also often been presumed to be, men's domain. So look at this. Her images are magical, aren't they? I love the color editing as well. They're just ethereal, gorgeous images. And I think a way to highlight the issues that we care so much about are to highlight the heroes. And so she's doing this with the scientists there. We see this throughout the book. Who are the helpers? Who are the helpers? And interestingly, we identified this at We Animals as well, and in animal advocacy also fairly male-dominated, because people who run organizations have historically been men. And so what we did is we created the Unbound Project, focusing on photo stories of women animal advocates around the globe. And yeah, we saw that was a necessary thing as well. So I'm really grateful for that focus. And maybe I'll mention Morgenheim's work as well of the animals who have been hit by vehicles. It's hard not to have tears in my eyes when I look at these images, and not just because of what's happened to this animal and how it was probably not necessary had people been more careful and so on, but like the care and consideration, just the idea of doing this makes me cry. I think it's a beautiful way to make us look and to memorialize the animals who really deserve it. Yeah.
So what do both of you think about the relationship between aesthetics and meaning and beauty, and how the craft of photography works in conservation? I know Rhonda's prepared for that, so why don't we let her...
Just happen to have a few notes. So I'll start. I'll give you time to think about it.
Sure.
But,
if you have anything to add to Rhonda's...
I do. I probably will, yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm sure you will. So photography, I think, is the offspring of this happy marriage between art and science. But so related to aesthetics and, based on sort of the quadrants of things, I was thinking about it in this like 2x2 quadrant. So on the horizontal axis, on the left is art, and then on the right is science. And then on the vertical axis, on the top is emotion, and the bottom is evidence. And so I see conservation photography sort of like right in the middle, like right smack in the middle there. But then aesthetics can be anywhere on that whole quadrant. And I think that's the sort of the key to that. But for the book, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but the strength of it is that we really use beauty to entice people. There's not like a uniform approach to it, but it's really kind of just playing off, some of these like spectacular photos that are beautiful, but they may not necessarily be pretty or pleasant. And as we know, beauty is not moral, so we shouldn't sort of conflate the aesthetic beauty with good. And I think of the frog's legs photo. I mean, that just, sort of resonated so much. I know it's not in the book, but it's like, again, sort of the reactions, like our first reaction to that photo was just, it's beautiful with the colors. And then you realize what's going on. And then especially as you look, there's like, this frog couple in the center, because it was like right after they spawned. And so then at that point you get sort of horrified by the image, but then also your reaction to it, that you thought it was beautiful. So it just makes it really, really memorable. So I don't know. I keep going back to this image. It wasn't part of the book. The book, sort of the cover image. I mean, again, that's sort of a similar thing with this sort of beautiful iceberg in the Red Sea. And then when you look at it, like, is it blood in the water? Is it fire? Or is it just this beautiful sunset? Which it's actually the Antarctic sunset during the solstice. And again, when we were figuring out, like, what do we put on the cover of this book, we sort of went back and forth. Do we do something that is just, nature's beauty, which might have been, like a charismatic creature or something more typical for this kind of book? But we really wanted to sort of grab attention and sort of stress the urgency. So we went with this.
Let's get some
Yep.
questions.
I was just going to say, if you have any questions, feel free to write them down and hand them over to the aisles, and they'll come to me. And I'm going to just push this through to the thank you. And in the meantime, Joe, do you have anything to add before we take questions?
Yes, I think I'll quote Henri Cartier-Bresson's decisive moment. This was an expression, a term that he coined in the early 50s, I think it was, about capturing things precisely. And when you do so, when you capture that moment in time that has all the right elements of light, expression, angle, it inspires awe, and it's beautiful. And we need those decisive moments. We need to capture those so that we can bring people in, so that we can bring people into the deeper story. And we're seeing that. We're seeing precision in all of the images across this book, and that's what gets them from good to great. I think that's the difference between a good and a great image.
So you mentioned that some of the images that you saw, in particular, the image of the fox memorial, or coyote memorial, I think it's coyote, make you feel choked up. So one of the questions from the audience is, how do you balance your mental health with all of the horrors that you witness in your journeys?
I'm able to do it because it's helping, because it's creating change, because the images that I shoot, though it's very difficult to do so, I'm very determined to get them out into the hands of people who are campaigning, changing laws, whatever they're doing, get those images to them to make a difference is very hard. I had been in early days diagnosed with PTSD, and I had therapy for that, but I just keep going back because I'm somehow good at it. I'm somehow good at, as we all are, we're so passionate about going, as I said, to the ends of the earth to tell a story and to tell an unreported story. And in the case of the animals we use in farms and so on, that's very unreported. So the passion to do it again and again is very, very high.
All right, Rhonda, this one's for you. A bit provocative, so buckle up. How much of the royalties from the Academy do you share with the photographers? So, like, from the big picture competition, like how, in terms of the use of those images, how do you share the royalties with the photographers? Do they have to assign copyright to the Academy? And how can these badass photographers support themselves?
Fortunately, I can answer all those questions.
I know. That's what I asked.
Thank God. So the competition, there's a fee to enter the competition, and then that money is what goes to the prize money for photographers. So it's $5,000 for the grand prize, and then $1,000 for each of the 6 category winners So just a little plug for those who want to enter. And then in terms of the use of the images, those images, and I think this is one of the reasons why big picture is so highly regarded, we have very sort of high ethical standards, both in how you take the picture and how we use the picture. Because a lot of other places might just sort of use those images on anything else they would like to use them, and that's why they run competitions. But if you enter Big Picture, we only show those images as part of Big Picture. So as part of the Big Picture exhibit or the Big Picture exhibit online, we don't use them in any other way.
And do you have to be a professional photographer to submit to Big Picture?
No, you do not. I mean, a lot of photographers do, but we've had a winner. There was a 17-year-old guy, person, child, adult, young person, 17-year-old from Sweden who took a picture in his backyard, and it was with a camera, but he used his iPhone to light a leaf, and it was just this sort of magnificent picture, and it was a winning image. So you definitely do not have to be a professional photographer. You just have to sort of look and observe and take pictures and tell a good story about what that is and submit it to the competition, which actually we are just extending the deadline. It was supposed to close on the 1st, but we're extending it to another week, and you are the first to know about that.
And also there are more than just the grand prize winners, and it's great exposure for photographers, and it can help get your career to the next level, which brings in more money. So there's that too.
So unfortunately, we only have time for one more. So I had to make the very difficult decision which of these great questions we can ask. And I've chosen this one. So Joanne, given the proliferation of imagery due to the ubiquitous nature of smartphones, how would you recommend aspiring, and then put in later, female wildlife conservation photographers get started in today's day and age?
Just take lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of pictures. And show them to people, not the people who are going to say, oh, that's really good, and, try and prop you up. No, you need photo critiques. You need to take a lot of pictures. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Your pictures are going to be very bad for a very long time. And in fact, even people who have been shooting for 20, 30, 50, 60 years take mostly bad pictures. You have to work really hard to get those decisive moments. You have to go really far. You have to keep going, and you have to submit to competitions to get critiqued. And don't be shy, and pay photo editors. Photo editors offer photo critiques, or go to people whose work you love and just say, hey, can you look at these 10 pictures and offer some feedback? Sometimes they won't charge you for that, but you really have to immerse yourself.
And just a little plug for Susie. She actually has a program called Girls Who Click, which is a program designed to help young female photographers get better at their craft.
One more question, though. You didn't get to talk about Britta's elephant stools.
I don't know if we have time.
If you can do it in 30 seconds. or that could be a good conversation out during the reception.
Okay. Well, the short story, again, it's she entered it in the competition. It was a grand prize winner. The image got publicized, and then European authorities invited her to come over. Actually, and the Americans, talking fast is not my specialty. So it was this image was featured on the website so that people in the States, so that people could understand sort of what was happening with sort of all this confiscated wildlife. And then she was invited to go to Europe and do photo stories there of similar sort of products and places where, illegal wildlife trade was being kept. And then from there, she was invited to speak at the House of Lords and talk about what was happening. And from there, got some pledges to actually change some of the laws around illegal wildlife trade. So that's how an image can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm glad we made time for that, but thank you.
You're welcome. So, in closing, I like to say thanks to this prestigious panel. Let's give a round of applause to the panel. to Indra Viscontis, Joanne MacArthur, and Rhonda Rubenstein for participating in this wonderful, thought-provoking, visually delicious conversation. I'm a photographer, I can't help this, about the power of photography and Big Picture's new book, Seeing It All. We encourage you to visit the Academy and to its offerings, including this year's Big Picture exhibit, which is now on view until Sunday, April 7th. We're delighted that you join us today during the Commonwealth Club's 120th year of enlightened public discussion. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.